and newsagents.
Layla, do you have hope?
I do. I have to. I cry every single day, John. Every single day. And I'll do these interviews and people say, how do you hold it together? Well, the answer is I don't. And I go home and I let it out. But I do it because you have to have hope. Because if you give up on the hope, then you have nothing.
Well, I'm joined now by Leila Moran MP, the Member of Parliament for Oxford, West and Abingdon. You're also the Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesperson. You're also a Member of Parliament. You are also a British Palestinian. And it's great to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with your family. How are they doing?
So my mother is Palestinian, my father's British, hence the British Palestinian badge. And my mother's family is primarily from Jerusalem, actually. So in Palestinian identity terms, we count ourselves as Jerusalemites, but we do have an extended family who are from Gaza and are currently in Gaza City still. And when people ask how are they doing, I think at this stage all I can say is alive. And I am really privileged to be able to say that, because I now know so many people who have lost not just one or two members of their family, but 50, 60 members of their family. And I just cannot even begin to imagine what that's like. So as awful as it is that I am petrified for them every day, and I worry that tomorrow I may not be able to give that answer, it's also, I'm grateful to be able to know that they are alive. I have to say, when the blackouts happen, when the comms blackouts have happened and we haven't been able to get in touch, and that has been a torture, because you just want to know, like any family would, that they're okay. For what it's worth, the picture in the West Bank isn't brilliant either. Of course, anyone connected with any kind of family connection, heritage connection to the area, everyone is scared. What's happened in the West Bank is my family's essentially separated. So there's been an essential sort of lockdown on the cities. So it's very hard to get out of Bethlehem, very hard to move between Ramallah, Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Some of the families in Jericho, some of them are very elderly, and we haven't been able there to be together. It's also shut down the economy. If you're a teacher from Bethlehem trying to get to a school in Jerusalem, the way that the checkpoints are now operating is such that it's almost impossible for people to get around, and they're scared too because of the settler violence, which is also at an incredible level, more than we've ever seen. So it's a horrid picture. I think no matter where you are, rightly all eyes are on Gaza, but please don't also forget the West Bank. I'm really worried about what's happening there too. Yeah,
and that is a source of great tension. And if people aren't familiar with the geography, Gaza and the West Bank are not linked at all. They are separate pieces of land in different, West Bank to the west of Israel and Gaza to the south on the Mediterranean strip, going down to the Egyptian border. Just sticking with your family in Gaza, who I think are a Christian family, aren't they?
Yes, we are. So we are a Christian Palestinian family. I wear my faith lightly, by the way, but actually as a term of identity, that is important to Palestinians, very often sort of which community you are part of. We're Greek Orthodox. And they are living in Gaza City. So these are my mum's cousins, and their houses were bombed in the first week in the response after the absolute atrocity that was October 7th, and it still pains me to think about the next day. But their houses were bombed, and then they went to their church. It's actually the Catholic Church, and they are still there. People ask quite rightly the question, why haven't they moved? Yeah. And actually it's a question I've asked myself.
So just let me interrupt you for a second there. The advice from the Israeli government was move south, go to south of Gaza City, down to, as far as you can go, to stay out of harm's way because there would be military activity in the north. Yeah. Go on, carry on.
So their houses were bombed before that advice. So they'd already moved into the church by that point. And it's a sort of church complex. You know how a church will have sort of its Sunday school rooms and whatever. They're in a single room. There's 3 generations of them. The grandparents are very elderly and quite frail. And they don't want to be separated from each other. But then that advice came, and they looked at the feasibility of doing that bearing in mind they've lost everything at this point. They're being looked after by the nuns who are doing their best, but they are running out of food, they're running out of water. And they heard how people in the south are being bombed too. They heard how the so-called safe road to get from Gaza City to the south was also bombed. And there was a convoy of people, 70 people killed in a bomb. And they're saying to themselves, actually, I would rather be with my priest, with my family. I don't feel it's any safer to go there than it is here. And they are not British passport holders or foreign passport holders. They don't have that connection. So any chance of them going out by the Rafah crossing is slim to none. So they've made the decision, as many people have in Gaza City, to not move. I think part of the challenge that we've had, and in Parliament I've heard it too, people saying, Hamas are keeping them there. I just want to make it very clear. Hamas have nothing to do with the decisions they are making. They are making decisions based on their assessment of what is best for them and their family. And I personally think it's quite offensive to suggest that Hamas are giving my family any kind of marching orders. They've got nothing to do with the decisions they're making.
Let's just hear you in the comments describing the dilemma, I suppose there's no other way to put it, that they now find themselves in.
The conversation has changed in Gaza. No longer do they ask, where do I go to be safe? The question now is, where do I go to die?
So I think, as I said at the introduction, this is an interview like in three parts, which is the personal bit, the policy bit, and you as a constituency MP. If we could come to the policy bit now, that was in the House of Commons. What should happen now? Because I don't know quite where the Liberal Democrats stand. There are some people saying there should be a ceasefire. There are Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden have talked about a pause. Where are you?
So the position that we're taking now is quite deliberately echoing the position of the UN. So humanitarian ceasefire, which by its nature is temporary at first. What we need to focus on, and this is not different to anyone actually now, even Biden, we need aid in and hostages out, that's clear. But where I would draw a distinction, and you can't quite separate the policy from the personal. We do challenge the assumption that whilst Israel is obviously due a military response to the condemnable Hamas atrocities, absolutely. But we question whether there is a military solution to this. And in my view, the only way through this in the medium and the longer term, whilst minimising civilian deaths, is to set your eyes on that two-state solution and to find that political horizon. So the difference would be, it's not just and this is important, when you have that, and you have to negotiate the cessation, call it a pause, cessation, whatever it is, but in that time, it's not just the practical. Let's also focus on the political to create the space for what needs to come next.
If you are the state of Israel, Hamas has perpetuated the worst pogrom, the worst massacre since the Holocaust, a pogrom akin to what happened in the 19th century. And you still have Hamas today saying they want to carry out more October the 7th. And I think we can listen to the spokesman from Hamas who was on the airwaves in the last 24 hours.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية يجب أن تنتهي.
That is the Hamas official, Ghazi Hamad, saying, "We will repeat the October the 7th attack time and again until Israel is annihilated. We are victims. Everything we do is justified." If you're Israel...
It's despicable. It's undoubtedly despicable. And that is, why we fully support Israel going after the Hamas terrorists, without a doubt. We've said that from day one, and I have condemned long before this Hamas. We have to, however, also make sure that distinction is drawn, and people do make the distinction, rightly, between innocent Palestinian civilians, of which my family is included, and those Hamas terrorists. And people are looking at what happened in the refugee camp. And there was another church. My heart stopped when I heard this, that there was the Greek Orthodox Church in Gaza City was bombed. 16 people were killed, including a 4-month-old baby. We see scenes like that, and you have to think, where does this end? Is this right? And there are many people crying out for, is this within the rules? And I think that is very important as a question, and you have interrogated people on that. What I would say is, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know. I have a physics degree. I don't know. But I do think there are people who have an opinion on this, and some of those are the government lawyers. And so what the Liberal Democrats are calling for is an understanding of what the government lawyers have told any ministers, including the Attorney General, what advice they've had on what international humanitarian laws have been breached or bent. And we believe that the right thing to do now is to have them release that, because everyone's forming opinions over this matter, and it does matter. But from the point of view of
publish the legal advice.
Publish the legal advice. But from the point of view of my constituents, they're looking at what's happening and they're questioning, I think quite rightly, is this allowed? Is this okay? Because it doesn't feel okay.
I suppose the answer would come back is that it's not okay for Hamas to build tunnels under hospitals and have their control centres. And I've heard it from pretty authoritative sources who've spent a lot of time in the Gaza Strip and know it very well, that is exactly what they've done. And therefore, if you are trying to root out Hamas,
absolutely,
what do you do?
Yeah. And I get that. I'm absolutely, I want Hamas gone too. I want to make that really clear. There are other ways of achieving this.
But how do
this
you get
longer
Hamas
term
out?
peace?
If Hamas say, well, we're not going anywhere and we're going to carry on and we're going to carry on perpetrating October the 7th style attacks, then the Israelis can't say, oh, right, let's discuss a two-state solution when you've got Hamas planning the next raid.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend, John, to be a military strategist. I firstly need to understand whether sending, 6 bombs into a 1 kilometre squared, killing the hundreds of people potentially that they've ended up killing is right. It doesn't feel right. Am I pleased that they've started to dismantle some of that infrastructure of Hamas? Yes, actually. But is that the only way? And is that just? And where I think we need to get to with this is an understanding that a response, absolutely, we support. But is there a solution to this that is not political, bearing in mind that the Hamas leadership, the political leadership, isn't even there? You could raise Gaza to the ground, dig the whole thing up, and still you wouldn't be rid of Hamas. And as some people, I think, reporters near there and on the ground who know it very well, point out that Hamas is an idea as much as it is an organisation. So how do you get rid of an idea? And that is why we have to keep our eyes on that medium-term solution, that two-state solution. And yes, it feels far away. I appreciate that there will be people listening to me going, this is all kumbaya rubbish. It's not. It's the lack of that political horizon that has fueled them for so long. And if we are going to say, and I hope everyone joins us in saying, no more. This we've had enough of the killing. We have had enough of looking at what's going on in the Middle East and the latest thing that's happened there. This has been 75 years in the making. My 94-year-old grandmother is re-triggered from things that happened to her when she was 12. Enough is enough. And we have an opportunity now. Every time there has been a moment like this in the history of Israel and Palestine, something positive has come from it. And we don't know what that's going to look like. And some people are now calling for a peace conference in 6 months. I believe that the Spanish have asked for this as part of the Council of Europe. Yes, those sorts of the initiatives we need to bring those forward from now. That hope is what is going to get us through. And I agree, Hamas need to go. And there are those also saying Netanyahu needs to go. How Israel responds matters as much as anything else, because we need the Arab world to come with us too. And the bombing, the killing at this level, it's not going to help.
You're absolutely right to point out the previous occasions after the 73 war came, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat in Egypt, there was a peace deal. Again, Rabin, Arafat kind of got together, Oslo Accords. There have been periods of progress. I suppose when I look at it and having kind of been fascinated, reported from there on a number of occasions, I've never known a time where you feel like in the West Bank you have got this sclerotic, ageing, corrupt PLO-style Fatah infrastructure who no one is trusting.
No one.
You have got murderous, brutal killers in Gaza, and you've got Netanyahu in Israel, where so much is tied up with his own fate, the decisions he's taken, the belief that he could have a containment policy.
And may I also add to that, which is again not helping, the very right-wing elements who are in that government, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who in the and elements there in the last few days, you talk about that rhetoric of annihilation from Hamas. It's coming the other way from the ultra-right in Israel. And we can't let those people win. We cannot let them win. And I'm really worried that unless we collectively, by being we, I'm now talking with my politician hat on, unless we collectively harness the feeling, for the first time in my lifetime, John, what felt like a slightly fringe issue in politics is now being talked about up and down the country by my hairdresser, by the taxi driver, by everyone else. You know, is there a dinner table in this country that hasn't at some point talked about this? We have an opportunity, and I think social media actually is not necessarily a bad thing. We are now talking about it. Let's harness that energy into something good, because boy, is there so much bad.
But, you know, if you look at the other great examples where the peacemakers have come to the fore, I mean, South Africa, there was F.W. de Klerk and Mandela, and they wanted to kind of see what could be done. You look at Northern Ireland, and there was Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, and there was Ian Paisley and, you know, John Hume and Tony Blair, and it kind of, you know, somehow they got there. Who are the actors today in the Middle East region where you think, well, I believe that they could do a deal?
Yeah, they don't exist yet, is the honest truth of the answer. And whilst I've already been clear, I think Hamas absolutely have to go. I think Netanyahu and the current government need to go. You'll know as well as I, Israeli politics can move very quickly, and people will come. People are talking about Benny Gantz. People are talking about Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid has spoken about two states very recently, at the UN no less. So
Yair Lapid leads the opposition.
Leads the Yesh Atid bloc, which is sort of the more centrist, in Israeli politics terms, bloc. So there are people who in very recent history have been talking about this in the context of security, by the way. And I think this is the important thing to keep pressing. We want security. We want dignity, and for both people to live without fear. And that is why two states needs to happen. But on the Palestinian side, we undoubtedly need new elections. And there is going to be a period, and this is a big open question. We know likely Egypt's going to be involved, potentially Jordan, but we need to move to elections as quickly as possible in the Palestinian territories, and ideally have both Gaza and the West Bank led by the same people.
So, Leila, the problem that I've had it put to me by someone who has spent years on this is that the issue you've got is that you are not going to get Arab leaders, by which I mean Jordanians or Egyptians, to come into Gaza until Israel has made major concessions on statehood for Palestinians. And will Israel feel able to offer major concessions to Palestinians when you've just had October the 7th happen?
No, I understand.
And so it's kind of getting the stars in alignment, that if you describe what a two-state solution would look like, there are going to be issues over the right of return of refugees and all that sort of thing.
Do you know what the biggest issue, John, is the settlers?
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest issue is the illegal settlements. And for those who perhaps are unfamiliar, and I'm sure your podcast listeners are very familiar, but there has been a huge proliferation of
new
illegal
settlements,
and they are illegal. Everyone says they are illegal, including our own UK government. And every time they are raised in the Houses of Parliament, there is, condemnation for the fact that they are there, and they shouldn't be. And they are top of the list. They need to be top of the list of the new list of issues, because some people have now given up on a two-state solution as a result of that. But we have to find a way through this. And what I would say, you're right to point out, the stars aligning. But if you're not looking at them, if you are not looking at the stars, then how do you expect them to align? You have to go there. There has been no diplomatic effort, almost none, since Kerry, I think, was probably the last time, circa 10 years ago, was the last, and it was fairly limp-wristed attempt at something like this. Oslo was the last time that anyone can point to anything probably of real substance. In all of the examples you gave, South Africa, Northern Ireland, whatever it is, what I would say is that the international community was there, holding the hands of everyone involved as they went through the very difficult process. And Nelson Mandela was in prison for a long time too. The next leader could well be there, but they haven't come to the fore yet. We need to believe they are there, and as an international community say that we will hold the hands of both people while they go through this very difficult transition to peace.
But what if you've got someone like Iran, a regional superpower, who've got no interest in this happening?
But we've seen the effect, and we have, I have to say, America's warships being on the horizon while Iran are doing what they're doing. I mean, we are in a very difficult world at the moment, and the geopolitics of this is head spinning, right? So you've got, the Chinese and the Russians and everyone else getting involved, and this is no one more than I, who has skin in this game in a way that is very personal, is naive to the geopolitical world that we live in now compared to where we were before. But if we keep saying, it's just too difficult, if we keep saying, but what if, and that stops us from, rather than putting more energy into it, us putting less energy into it, then the only thing that we can guarantee is that this awful, 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 long-standing conflict will just never end. And we can't have that. We have to say, never again, stop it now. And I'm heartened, by the way, to see there are calls for this from within Israel. There are calls for this from Palestinians now, in the aftermath of October the 7th. There are families whose children have been taken hostage who are saying, this isn't the way to respond. We don't want this like this. And it's those moderate voices, the ones who are, these are the peacemakers. It's the mothers, it's the fathers, it's those who are affected on the ground. In Ireland, it was the same thing. It was often the families, the colonels of those hurt the most, who were able to set in motion what happened next.
So let's talk about the situation here in the UK, where the tensions have rippled out. You were talking about, there's not a dinner conversation that this doesn't come up. Your taxi driver, your hairdresser, whoever. I agree. I found exactly the same, and it's kind of troubling, and it's simultaneously vaguely reassuring that people want to kind of think about what on earth do we do, because I think people have recognised the extreme danger of it. There has been a ratcheting up of community tension, of hate crime, of anti-Semitic attacks, of Islamophobia. I'm sure you're seeing it in your constituency.
Yeah. And may I start by saying, when this first happened on October the 7th, and then we began to see the response in the first week, I purposefully, not despite, but because, went and attended a vigil held by my local Jewish community in order to grieve with them, to find solace with them, and to reassure them that we are all on the same side here. And their top call was that release of the hostages, which have not been released and absolutely needs to be continued to be focused on, absolutely. And then afterwards, we noted that, they'd pack away the flags and were very careful in dispersing. And since then, I am heartbroken to hear from members of the Jewish community in Oxfordshire who have lived there and led that community for 65 years, say for the very first time in their lives, they feel unsafe. Or, and this broke my heart almost even more, another who said they didn't feel unsafe, but they removed any insignia or their way of identifying as Jewish.
The Star of David.
Or the skull cap or whatever, not because they felt unsafe, but because they didn't want anyone else to feel unsafe from them. And we've also had a mosque where a petrol can was thrown at it, and on that petrol can said IDF rules. I was with an interfaith community political leaders group just this week talking about how do we, what's the state of play? And the way it was described was it's simmering and it won't take very much for it to change quickly. And I take that responsibility as a politician and as a member of that community very, very seriously. We need to soothe. We need to calm. We need, notwithstanding how we feel personally, and boy, has this been a tough 3 weeks, but our job is to pull people together. And so in Oxford on Sunday, we're having a county-wide vigil, which critically includes the mainstream Jewish community, alongside the Muslim community, alongside Palestinian and Israeli, and everyone who cares, who maybe has a stake in this or doesn't, and is just wondering why, to come and be together in a peaceful way. Bring your own candle, and we're going to light it together and reflect.
And then you see some of the protests that have taken place, the pro-Palestinian protests, and I've no doubt that the overwhelming majority of people who are marching, as you've described, feel this deep, and you'd have to be inhumane not to feel this deep humanitarian concern for the people of Gaza who need food, who need medicine, who need water, who need fuel, and all the rest of it. And you kind of just wish to God that stuff was going in. And that there wasn't this aerial bombardment taking place. I mean, you'd be mad not to wish that. But there's also been an element where you feel that there are some who are giving Hamas a free pass, who are glorifying in some of these things. And that is very intimidating for the Jewish community in the UK.
Yeah, and I think we need to appreciate it's not just the protests. And it's a reflection, I think, of something that I don't think many people appreciate, is there is a historical context to a lot of this, and that feeling of feeling unsafe and feeling like there are people who are now actively saying, we want you gone. That has deep roots in the Jewish community. And for what it's worth, from the Palestinian side, there is also a counter narrative, a parallel narrative, not even a counter narrative, but people have to understand that their independence is the Nakba for the Palestinians, the catastrophe. So we need to now forge a path forward together. And the way to do that is what I've been trying to do. I think it's one thing for me to stand up and talk about the Palestinians and what they're going through. That's expected. What I think is even more powerful is when I stand up and protect my Jewish community and the Israelis in my community, and talk about their feelings and understanding their feelings, and for them to do the same for me. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Because I think where most people are in the country is on the side of humanity, is on the side of peace. And I have to say I have been bitterly disappointed by some of the rhetoric coming out from government, in particular Suella Braverman. This is a time where we should be calming people. And the feeling is, among many communities, that the government has not just picked a side, but also chosen rhetoric that is purposefully divisive for their own political ends, and shame on them.
The hate marches, describing the marches in London as...
Certainly there are people who want to stoke hate. Certainly there are extremists in and among those people, and I fully support the arrests. But to call every single person who was marching there as part of a hate march, how does that help anybody?
Do you think Rishi Sunak supports that? Because I get the impression that Sunak
it's his Home Secretary. I mean, it's literally, this is the person who was meant to keep law and order in the country has been allowed to say this, and there has not been a distancing, an apology, that wasn't checked with us, nothing. And this is the problem the government has. And you talk earlier about the solutions to this. We need statesmen right now. We need people who can take themselves above the fray and understand that, populist politics like this has no place in a conflict as nuanced as this. And what they are doing is, I'm afraid to say, fanning the flames. And we cannot have it. So if they won't do it, then we all have to do it for each other. Because we have to soothe now. This is a time to hold each other close, notwithstanding what they are trying to do.
Layla, do you have hope?
I do. I have to. I cry every single day, John. Every single day. And I'll do these interviews and people say, how do you hold it together? Well, the answer is I don't. And I go home and I let it out. But I do it because you have to have hope. Because if you give up on the hope, then you have nothing. And what I'm sensing, and I've always had hope, but what I am sensing is, for the first time in my lifetime, the British public, people who've never understood this conflict before, coming behind that hope and pushing our political system to engage. And I thank them for that.
And I thank you for this interview. Leila Moran, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.